Okay, satisfaction. We are talking about satisfaction. Well, before I start talking about satisfaction, it might be good for me to tell you that I am probably not the right person to talk about satisfaction. Why is that? Well, because I think that satisfaction doesn't exist. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye. I know, you thought you were in for the shortest TED Talk ever. You wish. Well, okay. I like to make dramatic entrances, obviously. I'm in show business. I'll touch on that later. But let's go back to satisfaction. If that's true, if I'm someone who doesn't believe that satisfaction exists, then maybe I am the right person to talk about it. I actually believe that everyone is always the right person to talk about anything as long as they tell their own story. And me talking about satisfaction today has to be my own personal story because, quite frankly, after thinking about satisfaction for a while now and talking to a lot of my friends, I've come to realize that we all define satisfaction differently. What it means to us, the sensation of satisfaction, the situations that bring on satisfaction. So it's clear to me, yet again, that I have to go from my own point of view, my own story. So saying that I think satisfaction doesn't exist is, of course, not true. It's just that satisfaction, the way that I define it, doesn't really factor in my life so much. And how do I define it? Well, I'm happy to report that it's very similar to how the dictionary defines it. And yes, people, I am one of those people that pulls out a dictionary in cases like these and starts from there. So the first meaning of the word satisfaction in the dictionary is to satisfy. Well, the act of satisfying. So for me, I ask, okay, so what is it to satisfy? The dictionary says, to fulfill the desires, expectations, needs, and demands of a person, etc. Okay, makes sense. Desires, needs, expectations. So there's obviously investing in outcomes. But what if my point of view, what if my view of the world changed to the point where I stopped investing in outcomes? Or at least invested less? Or at the very least, if I realize that any outcome, good or bad, doesn't really define me, it doesn't really affect me as much as I thought it could. So let me tell you a story of how I've come to think like this, or just ask questions like these. As I might have mentioned earlier, yes, I'm in show business, you're welcome. And I've worked in theater, I worked in television, but I really feel that theater is my home, my base, more specifically musical theater, which is probably why I call theater show business. But I've been busy with it for about 25 years now, first as a performer and now as a choreographer and director. And when I first started out as a performer, there was this young, exuberant energy in me that propelled me forward, that was very naive, but at the very same time, very brave. And even though I felt the need to be creative, and that need was very inherent, very visceral, there was also the need to be noticed, to get attention, to get approval, and to maybe get satisfaction from it. But then at the age of 23, after a few years of a happy-go-lucky musical theater career, I had a major health scare. I was diagnosed with a scary disease, and without going into details here, because that would be a whole other TED Talk, I would just say that it flipped a switch in me. It sort of defined my path from then on. I was faced with my own mortality for the first time at 23, and I actually defined how I wanted to walk that path. And that was to be more aware, to pay attention, to be present in the present moment, and to maybe even find out if asking myself the question, what is life for, if that made sense. I also wanted to stay as healthy as I could be, not just physically, but mentally. And for me, that meant expressing myself, expressing my creativity, and using that creativity to tell my story as much as possible, whenever possible. And maybe then through the process, I don't know, evolve, learn about myself. And this path of mine has been an ongoing practice, really. I mean, I call it my constant curve of self-knowledge. And that curve has brought me to two major ideas that I like to live by. The first one, the more obvious one, is that everything is temporary. Everything rises and falls, comes and goes, yes. The second one is that we go through life looking at life through our own story of it, our own believed thoughts of reality, which very often are not really that reality. And that one is tougher to figure out because a lot of these thoughts and beliefs have been passed on to us from, I don't know, upbringing, society. But I like to sit there and ask myself a question: how would I go through life if I didn't believe those thoughts? Or if I just questioned them? Or if I even sometimes imagine that those thoughts never even existed? So before I lose you completely, let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm hanging out with friends. And on the next day, one of those friends calls me up and tells me, hey, you know, when you left, so-and-so talked about you, saying how you weren't a nice person. Okay, so if I believed that someone talking about me when I left the room was bad, I would probably get upset, angry, hurt, whatever. And if I believed that somebody thinking that I wasn't a nice person was a bad thing, I would probably get upset as well. But what if, for some reason, I never could believe those thoughts? What if those thoughts never even existed, if I didn't know that? Then maybe that person would say, hey, you know, so-and-so talked about you. Okay, people talk about people when they leave the room, that's normal. Well, she said you weren't a nice person. Oh, well, I try to be a nice person, but maybe she noticed something that I missed. Maybe I should talk to her. So yeah, I know that it can seem like a drastic switch to go from this to that, but I personally like to stay in that state of mind where I question these ideas and these thoughts, mostly when I get upset. And I've come to realize that a lot of times when somebody makes me angry or upset, it is not them. It is me interpreting something they did as something bad being done to me, when a lot of times they were actually trying to figure out the best way to go around it not to hurt me. But my story saw it as them hurting me. So it's my story, their story clashing. And again, the question, how would we go through life without those stories or even questioning those thoughts? So now, where is satisfaction here, you're asking? Okay, well, let me give you an example now how I employ all of this in my life, including satisfaction. Let's say my professional life. If I start working on a show, for instance, before I start, I might give myself goals such as the show should be amazing, the show should be entertaining, the show should make money. I should get praise for that show so that I can get more work and I can make more shows that make money and make producers happy. And if I believe that all of those things are good and that I needed them, I would also think that the opposite is very bad and that it could be very devastating. But I know from experience that a lot of those good things are not really that good, or at least not felt properly, and a lot of those bad things are not really that bad, and both good and bad, they'll come and go. So then along the way, if I use the questioning of thoughts, everything becomes so much lighter. There's so much less stress. Satisfaction, where's satisfaction here? Well, if satisfaction is something that comes from needs, demands, expectations being met, then satisfaction doesn't really factor in here so much. So if I set out to work on a show, I might actually just concentrate on the task at hand that day and to keep structure firm enough just to make it through the day, but never really concentrate on the outcome so much, because that is not my driving force. And quite frankly, it is not something that I can control how the show will turn out. I could think that my show was good, and then the general opinion of the public could be that it sucked. Yeah? I can maybe say that working on a show is satisfying, but to me, I would say working on a show brings me joy. It makes me happy. It makes me glad. So before I leave you, one thing I would like to say. All of this is basically my idea, my philosophy, my theory, but in practice, it's a slightly different story. Honestly, I'm so not there yet, and quite frankly, I don't think I ever will be. I don't think anyone ever really gets there, and I think we're always perfectly imperfect, and quite frankly, yes, there is investing in outcomes, and there is frustration, but just knowing what I know and having this little tool in my toolbox makes it all, as I said, lighter and so much more stress-free. And I also realized then that it is all not there outside somewhere. It's here with me. It's actually my work and it's my story. And I'm usually very grateful when I get to share my story with people, and I hope that me sharing this with you today was as satisfying to you as it was to me. Thank you.